Poke the Bear is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 196, presented by CLNS Media and sponsored by our good friends over at FanDuel and Factor Meals. My name is Conor Ryan, and once again, we are joined by very special guests here in 98.5 The Sports Hub's Ty Anderson. Ty, what's going on?
What's up, Connor? How are we doing today?
I'm doing swell, Ty. The Bruins are also doing swell, coming off a convincing win over the Colorado Avalanche on Thursday night. And I think Jim Montgomery kind of said it best that since the Christmas break, they've been playing really good hockey. They've been building their game. But over these last three games, you have that OT win over the Blues. You have the 3-0 win over the New Jersey Devils. Granted, they're pretty banged up, kind of like Colorado. But still, when you look at the Bruins in the game they're trying to build and getting a full 60-minute effort, I think I have to agree with Jim Montgomery. They're probably playing, I think, their most complete hockey, I would say, over this last week.
Yeah, and I think their win over the Colorado Avalanche on Thursday night is kind of, that's their Mona Lisa of the year, I think, in terms of what they're able to do, the in-game adversity they had to fight through. That's a dangerous Colorado team, right? Like, they could come at you. Even if you think you have it in the bag, like they could score 3 goals in a matter of 2 minutes. They're that kind of team. So I like their game a lot on Thursday night. So I think that's their best win of the year. And I think the biggest thing is that just what made them so great a year ago, were those shut down third periods. And I think you look at Monday and you look at Thursday, like you got those, and that's the biggest difference. I think, or maybe that's the biggest reason why they may think it's their best wins or their best 3 games in a row of the season. It's hard to deny them on that front, just based on how they looked in those third periods.
Yeah, no, especially when I think you look at the way the Bruins kind of control that game. Yes, you'll take the hat trick from David Pastrnak, of course. You've got, DeBrusk continuing to play, I think, really well over the last couple weeks here. Guy like Lauko finally, gets off the schneid, finally gets a goal there. And that's a guy that, if you want to have that fourth line eventually gain some identity and have some guys that can impact the game and give you some momentum, having a guy like Lauko feel confident about his game is obviously key. But I think we've talked about this before. The biggest issue with this team so far has been like the D zone lapses. You look at the personnel they have here, should be without a doubt one of the best kind of defensive teams out there. And there's been way too many games, especially early on in the year, where you, again, empty net, you give up a goal, you lose an OT, which seems like it happens every time they go to OT. But it's a situation where this defense, the way they've been shutting guys down, like they took control of the game in the third period against the Devils. And then, as you said, Colorado, who have more than enough guys that can just take over a shift and can kind of be a cheat code to get you a goal. Colorado, I think, only had 4 shots on goal in the final 20 minutes of that game. Like, you look at this team, and yes, you'll take the added contributions up and down the lineup, but I think the foundation of this team, we knew this going into the year, was going to be elite goaltending and really stout defense. And I think you're seeing them play more to that identity, because I don't care what you want to say about, the amount of talent they lost in the offseason. Play games like that where your goaltending's on and you can shut down desperate teams in crunch time. You're going to win a couple of playoff games to keep on playing like that in April.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, what makes last night, Thursday night, so impressive is that, you don't have Carlo. You still don't have Derek Forbort. And you're holding McKinnon and Rantanen, like you're holding them at bay, right? And Makar, what I loved is I love Coyle's play on Makar. Like 45 seconds into the game, that happens, and boom, they're on the board. Like, that's like a statement shift, right? That it's not going to be an easy night for you. It's not going to be an easy night for your top talents. And I think that goes a long way. And so your leaders lead, your goaltender is your goaltender, and you kind of go from there. But defensively, given what they're missing right now, and given that they went with a load up, up top with Lindholm and McAvoy together, I think that's what makes it even more impressive. Is like you are able to entrust guys that you typically wouldn't entrust with certain minutes, right? And they didn't drown. And I think that's a big difference between now and, maybe when they were hitting their lulls in December, is that they couldn't rely on those guys to play those minutes. And they had to lean on the star players every single shift. And it took a toll on them. So I think that's what I like the most about it as well. It's just that, as you noted, but also like just that defensive buy-in from all 6 guys I thought was phenomenal on Thursday night.
Yeah, it's actually crazy when you look at the way this team is structured and the amount of like unsung heroes is something that Evan and I talked about earlier this week is like as like a first half review, there's so many guys that have pulled on the rope that have exceeded expectations or have carved out set roles. We've talked about JVR, we've talked about Heinen, like about guys like Geeky, Shattenkirk. Lately, Parker Weatherspoon's been playing really, really good hockey, and we'll talk about him in a minute here. But in terms of unsung heroes, though, granted, he's in a top 6 role, but the way that Charlie Coyle has erased so many fears about a critical spot in the lineup, it's one thing where I think last year people started to really, glean his value as a defensive force, right? Like he was kind of their third line shutdown guy. And when Charlie Coyle is on, he's such a pain to kind of account for in the offensive zone, but he's so defensively accountable. He's such a big body that can make plays, as you saw in that game yesterday. But his overall 200-foot game this year has been immense. And you'll take the fact that he's on pace for 30 goals, 60-plus points. He's driving play. He looked good with Marchand and Pastrnak as kind of a top-heavy line early on in that game. But if we're looking at unsung heroes, the amount of fears that I think a guy like Coyle has calmed down for this team, you can't really understate how huge he's been for this team.
Oh, he's been gigantic. He's been absolutely gigantic. And, there was a play in the waning moments of Thursday's game where he's in a one-on-one battle with Nathan McKinnon for a loose puck, and Coyle wins it. And he really frustrates McKinnon. McKinnon wraps his arms around him and tries to slim him down. He's pissed off. He realizes he just lost the game. But that's when Coyle's moving and he's playing his game, he's such a nightmare for anybody. Like the size, the strength, the reach, the defensive acumen that has gotten noticeably better over the last year and a half. It makes it hard for the opposition. And, I think it's really interesting, on Thursday night, their top 2 centers go a combined 22 for 35 at the faceoff dot. That's another ingredient, to their secret sauce of how they win games is when their centermen have strong nights at the dot. It helps kind of, bridge the gap between them and a star-powered team like Colorado, I think. But Coyle, I mean, it's funny. I got a tweet last night before the game saying, would he be an all-star? Or an honorable mention for an all-star? And it's he's playing excellent, but there are so many great forwards in this league that it kind of flies under the radar how good he's been for this team this year.
Yeah. It's also crazy. I think when you hear a lot of national people talking about the Bruins, and we'll talk a little bit later on in the show about trade deadline ads, everyone still mentions well, they could use a center. It's I don't know. You've been watching them that much this year. Again, maybe down the road, you want to find that probably proven solution. I know there's flashy guys out there that you can look at further down the road, like a Lindholm or a Hurdle, what have you. But Bruins, play down the middle has been far from their biggest issue this year. Even I think Zacha's had good games there. Frederick, when he's shifted over, has been pretty solid. But that's not been the biggest issue for this team. Coyle may not be flashy. He may not be what, maybe national media is looking at as a proven top 6 commodity, but he's done more than enough. It's not like he's just with, Marchand and Pastrnak and his stats are getting juiced up because of that. Guy is being a 200-foot player that's impacting the game in a variety of ways. I mean, that play to steal the puck from Makar, who's so good when he gets his feet moving there, stop the play kind of in its tracks and then feed it over to Pastrnak, get a goal a minute in. That is an impact player making an impact move there to set the tone early, which is really good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're asking me straight up, what are their needs at the deadline? Center's probably number 4.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's probably number 4 for me. I would say number 1 would be another high impact left shot D. Number 2 would be a winger, another scorer, perhaps. And then I'd say, a physical 4th liner who could maybe turn tides, like you lost with Milan Lucic. And then I'd say center, because I think that, there's time to acquire one of those players. But I don't know if that is the biggest difference between them winning a Stanley Cup in 2024 or not. They're going to need some bounces and some favorable things to go their way. But ultimately, that's a longer term issue that I think you'll have multiple chances to address, beyond the 2024 trade deadline. So that's why that takes a back seat, as well as the play of Coyle, Zacha. You mentioned Frederick, Patra. Geeky's been solid when moved to the middle as well. Johnny Beecher has been a great defensive zone center option, I think under the radar in a lot of respects. So they have enough centers. I think it's everywhere else that I'm like, if you want to make a deeper push, like that might be the more, prudent move if there's any to be made this deadline season.
This current like roster almost kind of reminds me of like Vegas's rosters over the last couple of years, like before Eichel showed up, where it's like you had guys that maybe people didn't view as being like proven top 6 centermen, like a guy like Chandler Stevenson, where it's like, all right, like this guy's definitely exceeding expectations, but he's not the best fit. When I think people now realize like a guy like Chandler Stevenson, like Coyle, can be a very good top 6 guy in terms of impact in the game. But for Vegas, it's like, all right, we know we probably eventually could use an Eichel, a franchise centerman, but like we'll solve it eventually. Like we still got a lot of talent, we still got pieces in place, but we're not like going out there trying to get one right now. Like when the right situation happens, and if you're the Bruins and it's fucking, Thomas Hertl wants out and they can eat up some of his contract or something like that. Clayton Keller, when like eventually Arizona stops being good once again and they run out of money and they're playing at like the YMCA and they want to move that contract, like eventually I think the Bruins like are in a spot here where whether it's this free agency this upcoming summer or down the road, they'll solve it. But right now it's not like it's something that's tanking their chances this current season at all.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like who were the Golden Knights centers, before Eichel? It was like William Karlsson, Stevenson. They had Eric Holla for a hot minute.
Yeah.
Tomas Nosek, I think, played center for them. He played a little bit of wing too, but like that was truly like our talents on the wings and on the back end and in net, and we're that team, right? Like, so that's really interesting. That's a really interesting comp. I've always said that the Bruins right now are going for the Nashville model, where Nashville had all these horses on the back end, and and they had the great goaltending, and it made them, a contender. Maybe not a favorite, but a contender. All those years. So. I think that, like when you look at their play right now, I think it's silenced a lot of narratives. Like it's silenced a lot of narratives in terms of like, A, they're going to be bad. B, their centers aren't up for the task. Like, yes, they could use a high impact center. I'm not going to say they could. Every team could. But right now, with a $4 whatever million bonus overage and, having to dig in the bargain bin, like you are getting a lot from your centerman right now, and that's very far on the bottom of my list of complaints right now, I think, when it comes to this Bruins team.
Yeah, without a doubt. We'll keep on talking about the current makeup of this team, especially with some reinforcements on the way for the Bruins. But before we do that, let's take a quick break and hear from our good friends over at FanDuel.
NFL season is wrapping up, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. Now, the app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Once again, shout out to our good friends over at FanDuel. All right, Ty, when you look at this team and the way they're playing, it's good news for Boston in terms of the fact that you're also having a lot of reinforcements back. I mean, Linus Ullmark is already active. It looked like he blew out his hip, his groin, his knee, whatever worst case scenario. Sure looked like that was going to be the case in Arizona. Miraculously, he misses 5 total games. He's already back on the ice last Saturday. So the Bruins dodge a major bullet there. Brendan Carlo and Matt Poitras are on the brink of returning. They, sure if that was a playoff game, you probably have them potentially back for Thursday's game against Colorado, but they're right there. Derek Forbert's still a little bit of a ways away, but still he's back on the ice. It's good news for him, and he's been a guy that I think we all know how good he is on the PK, but his 5-on-5 numbers this year have been pretty zany in terms of how impactful he's been. So all good news for the Bruins in terms of just having more capable guys back there. But specifically looking at the defense, when this team is healthy, and again, that's maybe best laid plans, right? You never know what one guy comes in, another guy comes out due to injuries. But if they have like their full assortment of guys, and you've got Carlo and Forbort, and we have Parker Weatherspoon, who again we mentioned earlier, but he's playing really strong, simple hockey now. Who are kind of the odd men out? Because I think we look at like Lohrei obviously is the first guy that sent him down to Providence, have him keep on working on his game, should benefit all parties. But then who is it? Is it Grzelcyk the odd man out? Like, how do you think the Bruins are going to approach if they have a full 6-man unit and how they kind of tinker with that decor?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think the easiest first guy out is Mason Lowry, just so you can get him more minutes down in Providence, versus playing 12 to 13, 14 minutes up here every night. But then you go beyond that, and I think Wotherspoon and Grzelcyk, that's a real conversation right now. And Grzelcyk just hasn't looked like Grzelcyk consistently. I think he's had some really good games. I thought the game that he had in Vegas was tremendous. But overall, like, he's a guy that you're seemingly consistently asking for a little bit more out of this year. And you just wonder what that means for him. Like we've talked about the playoffs last year, and he's a scratch, and a key moment. And then you look at his usage this year, contract year, typically, I think that, and this is a weird way of saying this, but like, wouldn't Sweeney have taken care of this by now? Like, it's not a contract that's going to hold everything up.
Right. It's not the Brust or anything like that,
Right. It's a very Kevin Miller-esque kind of contract, you'd think, in terms of hammering that out. That hasn't happened yet. And so it's kind of a weird year for him, right? And Wotherspoon has been great on the left side, the right side. Now, he has limitations. That's very obvious that he's going to have limitations. But if you're just putting them side by side right now, it's hard to take Wotherspoon out of this lineup right now. It's just really hard, I think, to do that. So you may have a legitimate conversation there between Wotherspoon and Grzelcyk, especially if they're going with a Hampus Lindholm, Charlie McAvoy top pairing.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Because again, in a perfect world, and we've mentioned this before with a guy like Grzelcyk, like, you can talk about the limitations, talk about the playoffs, which again, I don't think he was really a net negative last year against Florida's, forechecking and all that pressure. I think there was a couple other guys that had far worse series. Still, like, the writing's kind of on the wall when he's only playing 13, 14 minutes a night in a playoff game, gets scratched. Who knows how that game 6 would have been different if, he's in instead of like a guy like Clifton, who just unfortunately had like a really rough game. Forbert had a really rough game there. But like, that was the first sign of like, does Montgomery not view him as like a long-term asset? Because I think there's a lot to like about Grzelcyk when he's on his game, especially in terms of his versatility and how I think he also elevates other guys. Like the play he has with McAvoy has been well established for years, but that's probably been the most shocking thing is, all right, you can say individually that you don't like Grzelcyk's game, what have you, but when he's with McAvoy tends to play better. It's like a line you don't have to worry about, a pairing you don't have to worry about. Montgomery can put those guys together, can put a very, very good defenseman in Lindholm with Carlo. You're all set. Your top 4 is locked in there. Hasn't been the case this year. I think the Bruins have only outscored opponents 8-7 when Grzelcyk and McAvoy are out there, when they've been a 5-on-5 cheat code for years, right? Like they've been about as steady as you can get in terms of how impactful they can be at 5-on-5 play. So I think when you look at like Carlo obviously coming back, you slot him back in there, and like Forbert's a guy that maybe going into the year, you're like, all right, like maybe you can swap him and Grzelcyk out or what have you. But like Forbert's been pretty solid. Like, again, like the PK's been good. Wotherspoon stepped in those minutes. Again, he's not flashy, as you said, but is playing simple, smart hockey that is not, putting him on the wrong side of highlight reels where he's trying to do too much or getting burned in the D zone. But like the fact that I think Forbert's had a really strong year, that when he does get back, and again, who knows with this nagging injury, like whether it's got to be managed, what have you, but it's definitely makes for a tough conversation. Cause like, I don't think Wotherspoon's a guy that you want to be, sending back down to Providence, having him being put on the wire or anything like that, because he's been solid. Even if he's not starting every day, like Wotherspoon's kind of what you're looking for is like an ideal 7th defenseman, especially for the playoffs. Like that's a guy you want to bring in for a game or two if you need to change the complexion or maybe add a little bit of sandpaper to your game, because he can provide that.
100%. And I think the other part of that too is that, and people know more about this than I do. I admit I am not off the top of my head well-versed in the waiver wire rules and, what an emergency recall is versus non. But I believe because Wotherspoon is an emergency recall, he doesn't have to go through waivers.
Mm-hmm.
But if he is, you want to avoid that regardless.
Yeah.
Like, he's a guy that gets scooped up by somebody who's defense needy right now because he's cheap and he's been playing well. He's been playing well in an elevated role on a good team. So, listen, if Spencer Martin gets claimed, I think Walter Spoon's going to get claimed by somebody. That's just how I feel. But ultimately, yeah, like Forbert's in, and I think he's in whether you like it or not. He's the rock of the PK. He limits the exposure of hard, heavy, high leverage minutes for guys like McAvoy and Lindholm and even Carlo, to a degree. So he's going to be in. And it really comes down to who's going to sit. So I think with Wotherspoon, I think that what's really impressive about him to me is that, I don't know about you, but during training camp, I didn't see anything. I was like, oh, okay, this is a Providence. This is Tommy Cross. You know what I mean? And those guys have value, obviously, but I didn't see him pushing for the spot. Whereas Ian Mitchell and Mason Lohrei were looking like, well, okay, wow, you got something here. But I think with Wotherspoon, he's really come on and he's coming into his own. And I think comfort is the biggest thing with him right now. He's kind of a guy that Jim Montgomery and Joe Sacco can clearly look at and say, yeah, go do this. And they're not worried about it. They just know it'll get done. It may not be pretty, but it's going to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely some tough decisions for the Bruins. Again, I think we're expecting Kahlo back as soon as possibly Saturday, or if not, in the next couple of days. Forbort, we'll see. I think he's still probably technically week to week. Like Montgomery said, he's still just starting to get back up to a swing of things. And I think when you're considering how much that lower body injury has been really bothering him all year, really take your time, especially when your defense is playing like this right now and you have guys like Wotherspoon or what have you. You've got the time to let that guy rest up and hopefully be ready for when the games really start to matter in March and April and all that kind of stuff. So obviously some tough decisions there. Before we go to our next commercial break here, I figure we might as well talk about the rumor going around, Ty, about one Patrice Bergeron. I know it's been it's been a bit of a flurry here with obviously Spit and Chicklets mention breathe life into a potential rumor of Bergeron skating. Bergeron reaching out to the esteemed Steve Conroy, the Boston Herald, has denied it. I can't see any situation. Again, there's a lot of secrecy involved with some of these things. Bergeron is not a guy that tends to keep his cards close to his chest anyway, but I have to imagine that's not something that's going to be an actual viable discussion as we get to the second half here.
I'd be very surprised. To your point, yes, the Bruins will make it a point to break it themselves.
Yes.
He's the most protected player, I think, out of anyone I've ever covered in my life in terms of they will not let you scoop Bergeron. They will not let it happen. And you respect that, right? Like Bergeron's contracts are broken by the team. They're not broken by anybody else.
No.
It was the same thing with Chara towards the end, right? Chara's contracts are broken by the team. So I think there's a respect factor when it comes to any former captain of the Boston Bruins that they like to uphold. Bergeron doesn't strike me, and I'm curious if you feel the same. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who would go back on what he says. You know what I mean? He doesn't strike me as the Brett Favre or the Tom Brady type, and that's not a knock on those guys, but the way that Bergeron looks at things. Sorry, I got a light falling here. I got a ring light trying to make me look nice, and then I turn it off, so I look like shit anyways. But no,
I thought Doom was jumping into the shower.
I'd welcome.
Yes,
that. No,
of course.
But he doesn't seem like the type that would go back on this, right? It just feels like he kind of truly realized, okay, my body's cashed. I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Yeah, it's something where I think with Bergeron, when it comes to his own game, his approach, he's always been, I think, refreshingly candid with that. For a guy that is playing in a Stanley Cup final with cracked ribs and a collapsed lung and all this shit, he's, I think, very upfront when it comes to, every athlete in the battle against Father Time, knowing when, the run has kind of ended here. And yeah, you could make the argument, as has been the case in this whole week, comes back fresh for February and March. You limited his minutes, have him run for the playoffs. That's great. That's the storybook ending everyone wants. Same as last year when everyone thought that was going to be the storybook ending. But whenever Bergeron has spoken to the media or has had interviews since he's retired, the one thing that I always think stands out to me is he seems like he's very much at peace with retired life and embracing this kind of next chapter, as opposed to it, lamenting the fact that what you've built your whole life around that chapter's ended. I think he's got appreciation for that, but also being candid of like, listen, I'm sure there's plenty of times he's watching a game or he thinks he still has a little bit of gas left in the tank, as every uber competitive professional athlete is. But then you take your first hit in the game back and that whole complexion changes. And he's been kind of candid about that. So I agree with you in terms of just Bergeron's overall approach, how he has mentioned things in the past. I just can't see it being a thing where he kind of switches that narrative and tries to make another run when, again, the toll it takes, the amount of damage that he's put on his body already. I think he's just enjoying retired life. And I'm sure he'll be back for the playoffs as a fan banner captain, and the Garden will lose its shit. But I think that's kind of where he is going to be when you get to April and May, as opposed to on the ice.
Yeah, and the other part of it too is that at the end of the year, he told us that he wasn't going to get surgery for the back injury that he had. Isn't that kind of a sign that you're done if you're not going to get the surgery for a back issue that could pop right back up? You know, so that's another reason why I think that he's legitimately done. It's over. Enjoy the 19 years, but don't bring it back for a 20th because, or don't get your hopes up rather for a 20th because I don't see it happening again. That's just how I look at things. The Bruins themselves could, the Bruins have lied to me about Bergeron in the past. There are things I've heard and things I've asked, and I've been given answers that are straight up lies. Yes. So I don't know what to believe, but I don't think he's coming back. I don't think he's back. He's doing commercials now. He's doing alumni games. Like, I think he's done, man.
Yes, exactly. And if by the time we drop this podcast that a graphic comes up from the Bruins being like, Bergie's back, don't yell at us, please. Don't yell at us.
Right.
Because I know that could actually also be the case. So, Ty, before we wrap up this podcast, let's take another quick break here and listen to our good friends over at Factor Meals. Get started on your New Year's resolutions with Factor, so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from each week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. No more wasting time in the kitchen. Not only does Factor offer fast, simple solutions when I'm too busy to cook, they also help me stay on top of my goals. With offerings like Protein Plus and Keto, I can stay on track. This is definitely going to come in handy for my New Year's goals. So head to factormeals.com/poke50 and use code POKE50 to get 50% off. That's code POKE50. Factor Meals, your go-to ready-to-eat meal delivery service. And now, let's get back to the show. Once again, shout out to our good friends over at Factor Meals. Ty, we've hit the point. We're in the dog days of the regular season. We know it's inevitable. There's going to be some trade rumors, trade discussions coming up. Trade deadline, I think, is March 8th this year. So we know once the calendar flips to February and the hot stove starts heating up, I'm sure we'll have to write a couple of things about trade targets, potential fits for the Bruins, potential needs, but figure we might as well get ahead of it because I think we're both on the same wavelength here. Should Bruins fans really be expecting a lot of, there'll probably be rumors. The Bruins are always, they're like the Red Sox, they're interest kings. They're always linked to guys out there, but should Bruins fans really be getting revved up for a impactful or even like any sizable news coming out of this deadline? Because it really doesn't feel like this is a year the Bruins are going to go full throttle to steal from another franchise in terms of acquiring talent at the deadline.
Yeah, no, I'm not getting all that horned up for the deadline. You know, if I'm the Bruins, I just don't see what move you're going to make that A, you can afford to make, B, you have the stomach to make, and C, is truly worth A and B. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, you could get Elias Lindholm, sure. Well, you could also get him July 1st, right? Like, barring him, going full Bo Horvat here and getting traded and signed an extension immediately, which at this point, if I'm him, I kind of want to see what my options are on July 1 after being in Calgary for so long. Yeah. So I just don't like, and then you look at the list of guys available, right? Like, this is not a knock on these players, but like Sportsnet released like their top 25 trade targets, right? Guys on that list are like, it's like Daniel Vladar, it's Andrew Peaky, it's Adam Boquist. It's like, what the hell's going on here? Like, is this really a great deadline for buying? I think that a huge problem, Connor, if you look at this, right? Like, go and look at the players that are on expiring deals. The majority of them are on contenders. They're not going to get traded. So who's out there? You know what I mean? Like, and if you're saying to me, oh, well, you can make a John Michael Lyles move or a Lee Stempniak move. I'm good. I'm all set. I'm all set. Thank you. I'll take my chances with what you have here.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's something that I think the only one that I would view as like a marginal upgrade that could fit an area is like, as you said earlier on, like if you find like a proven fourth line guy that can, you can put in, you can pencil in, you add some identity to that fourth line, which I think has probably been the biggest issue with that grouping is just like, it's almost like you need like a Hathaway this year because he could really be a guy that can give you a goal or two, can, finish with 5-6 hits, has done it over a couple of years. He's not like like a guy like a Greer who has shown it in spurts, but you maybe, you talk yourself into like, all right, 75 plus games with him in there. He can carve out a role. Like a proven like fourth line stalwart maybe is a guy that'd be worth getting. But again, it comes down to the price. There's not that many like proven guys that fit that kind of identity out there. And if they are on the market, it's going to be crazy expensive. It's like you look at guys like Luke Shen or these guys that, third pairing D that can kill penalties and log a shit ton of hits. Like those guys are going to go for a premium price because everyone covets those kinds of players at the deadline. So I agree. Like, I don't see this being a situation where you've got a guy like Elias Lindholm or anyone like that, like Noah Hannafin, all those guys. If you're the Bruins, you wait and see what the free agent market dictates. Cause one, you don't want to give up the assets now when you have the chance of signing them anyway, a few months down the road, but also comes down to the fact that you look at the way the cap situation is on this team where I think they've got like 50,000 in cap space. Like you're going to be moving a piece or two just to fit these guys on the roster. You're subtracting from the current grouping anyway. So I think the way you look at it, if there's going to be any moves, I feel like it's going to be more marginal than anything. There'll be Lindholm rumors. There'll be all that stuff. The Bruins will be interested, but I can't see them being the ones that make that move. Like it's been a great year. This is still a kind of a bridge year that has exceeded, I think, everyone's expectations, but I also don't think you should deviate from that path of like having it be a year. Don't trade a first round pick, have a run at it. You've got younger guys developing. You got a shit ton of cap space this offseason. Stay the course because you're already on a path that I think a lot of other teams, whether they're contenders at the end of their rope or teams that are trying to build themselves, they would kill to be in the spot you're in right now with the way the foundation of your team is still set up.
I have a name for you.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is realistic. I have a name for you on that front. He plays in the desert. He had a run-in with the Bruins last week. Liam O'Brien. Liam O'Brien is in the final year of his contract. He's making league minimum. Has over 100 hits. We know that he fights. We've seen that before. He had a career-high 11 points a year ago. Like, is that an example of somebody that, you maybe look at and say, okay, that's an upgrade over, say Oscar Steen, right?
Yeah.
Or Jesper Boquist when your team is fully healthy. Like that might be a guy that, could make sense for them. But to your point, what you just talked about, like, is his market juiced up? And now It's like, listen, we're not trading a third round pick for Liam O'Brien. Like, we're not doing that. You know what I mean? Like, is it one of those kind of situations? But like, that's a type. Like, that's a type that you're kind of talking about, I think, right? Like, just that fourth line, get it on the forecheck, be a little bit of a piece of shit, like toe that line between, oh, this guy is just hard and, oh, this guy's an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little difference there. Hathaway kind of has that. He had that. Mm-hmm. And so I think Liam O'Brien is a guy that I'd watch out for. Maybe that's something that, that's a trade that could materialize or make sense for the team. What I would say is that Arizona loves to ask for the moon with any of their players.
They sure fucking do.
Maybe there's not a fit there, but he is one of two pending UFAs that the Coyotes have up front. All their UFAs are on the back end. So, you wonder, maybe there's a little bit of a trade that could happen there, materialize, between now and the deadline. But you're talking about those kind of players. And I think, again, the problem is that a lot of those players are on teams that are in the playoffs or in the hunt. And, Arizona, they're not totally out of it yet. They're 5 points out. They have the game in hand over the second wild card team, which I believe is LA right now. So like they're a team that, they could make a run. You never know, but if not, that's a name that I would watch from the Bruins.
Yeah. Liam O'Brien also from Hingham. At least it sounds like his name.
Yes.
Sounds like he's a man from Hingham. But yes, Arizona, again, not the best, I think, trade partner for most teams. I believe they asked for the deed to TD Godden in order to get Oliver Ekman-Larsson in discussions before. So, but that is a team that I always mention, like Arizona, as you look at like the guys that fit like what the Bruins are looking for over the years, right? Whether it's like Lawson Krause was a guy people mentioned before, Liam O'Brien now. Still keep on going on the Keller train in a couple of years when eventually they're going to move on from that contract. Team that's definitely worth watching as they, again, who the fuck knows what they will be, where they will be playing in a couple of years and all their insolvency issues. But no, I agree though. A guy like O'Brien, someone like that it's kind of the player you look for that in like one game of a playoff series, drops the gloves, has a huge hit that shifts momentum, gets a greasy goal. And you're like, he's worth it for what that game was, right? And I think especially fourth line, the biggest thing, I think you've got pieces there that there's a lot to like when they're on their game with a Beecher or like a Lauko who finally gets a goal going, but getting identity and having a framework there. And I think when you had a guy like Lucic, in terms of setting the identity, makes a lot of sense how those pieces fall into place. Obviously, is not the case now. So if you're able to get a guy that is tough to play against, can, bring along a lot of younger players that also play off emotion like a Lauko or a Beecher and have that infectious energy of, being physical, taking the body, all those things. I think that can kind of go a long way. But if I'm a Bruins fan, I look more at those kind of players as opposed to a top 6 guy or a top 4D or anything like that. So definitely something worth keeping tabs on as we get to the trade market. Ty, before we wrap this up, where can we read your stuff? Where can we listen to you? All that good stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at 985sportshub.com. You can hear me on Saturday mornings. I'll do a little call-in for the hockey show there. You can also find me on X at _Ty Anderson. And that's where I'm at. How about you?
Over at boston.com, where we have game recaps, features, columns, breakdowns, all that good stuff over there. You can also find me on Twitter, X, whatever it is, at Conor Ryan _93. So you can find all of my stuff over on those various media outlets. So once again, this is episode 196 of Poke the Bear. I'm Conor Ryan. That's Ty Anderson. You fans have a great rest of your week.